May I request the delegates to kindly settle down? We are starting the next session. Delegates, kindly settle down. Over to you, Mr. Bandopadhyay.
So, once again, welcome to the second panel, which is the topic more or less remains the same. So we will discuss on climate change policy mitigation, and more specifically on some of the more relevant topic for industry, which is decarbonization and also ESG to some extent. As I mentioned in the beginning, that the previous session was, the panel was more the view from the top. We got the diplomats who were talking about the country initiatives, some of the apex level industry initiatives. And this is the panel essentially to get the view from the bottom, or view from the ground, rather I should say. Because I have with me with the panelists who all represents from the different organizations in business and academia. And in fact, they are working very closely with a lot of ground stakeholders. In the discussion of climate change, of course, we miss out a very important ground level stakeholder, which are the representative of the poor. And as we have seen, and we have also discussed that they are the biggest victim of climate change in the region. But maybe that's another forum. Sometimes we need to discuss that in detail. So, bringing the whole perspective from the context of India, because all the panelists who are present over there are essentially from India and representing Indian organization and Indian businesses largely. So there are a few important statistics I should start with, that in South Asia, the whole industry, such as the, if I say the manufacturing or hard industry, hard to abate industries, like construction materials, chemicals, they have the highly GHG intensive operations or energy intensive operations. According to International Energy Agency's outlook, that the industry's share in the total final energy consumption is projected to rise from today 35% to beyond 40% by 2040. Again, if we look at some of these commodities which are produced by these industries like steel, chemical, cement, these are important elements for our growth. And country like India, still at a much lower level of the per capita consumption of many of these commodities with respect to the world. So we have a huge growth potential, but the challenge is how do we grow, keeping the industry decarbonized and in a more climate friendly pathway. But industries are also today at the crossroad. There are many challenges which are emerging. So one challenge which we discussed in the previous panel is the Russia-Ukraine war, which has disrupted the energy prices, which has disrupted the commodity and energy supply chain. There are also the regulations. For example, there is a new regulation from European Union, which is carbon border adjustment tax. So which is saying that a set of commodities like steel, cement, fertilizer, if they have to enter the EU, then they have to pay a tax which is based on the carbon content of some of these products. So that means if those tax burden or liability needs to be reduced, the producers who are supplying this from the developing part of the world, they have to adopt the cleaner, greener, and the more low carbon processes. Thirdly, we see that there are a lot of pressure from the investors on ESG front. Now, ESG was not a new topic, but it has gained a lot of prominence in the last few years. So the investors, both institutionals as well as the domestic, they are really pushing the industries to comply with some of those ESG related aspects. However, on the opportunity side, there are also a lot of interesting things happening. For example, the cost of renewable power, especially in our country, is also going down quite significantly. We have seen a very encouraging policy moves from the government of India, which has announced a series of production-linked incentives to a number of areas which has direct or indirect impact on the climate-friendly development of the country or the net zero movement of the country. The government has also introduced green hydrogen policy, and it seems the government is really gung-ho about this area, although we all know that there are many things needs to put in place before the green hydrogen becomes a commercial reality for number of industries. And from the industry's point of view also, the decarbonizing their operations or moving to net zero is not an easy task, because many of the large industries in India, they have encashed a lot of low-hanging opportunities over the years. So today, the energy efficiency, resource efficiency, which have become more of the mainstream bread and butter activities for industries. But where they need to move into a more high capital expenditure type of projects, the breakthrough projects, which would help them to become low carbon or rather zero carbon over a period of time. And challenges are also enormous. Number one, we don't have today a lot of use cases for those breakthrough technologies. Things like green steel, or low carbon steel, or low carbon cement are still quite a way ahead. There are challenges in terms of accessing finance. We are talking about climate finance, carbon market, but many industries are really confused how to leverage those instruments. There are issues related to skills and capacity. And as industries transition into net zero or the low carbon path, it needs a radically different skill set, understanding the curriculum to follow through. And today, the one more important dimension has come with this whole digitization aspect, which is creating another layer of complication in terms of the skill set. And last but not the least, there are the policies. And sometimes the policies are clear, sometimes the policies are quite ambiguous in many respects. So these are the challenges we would like to today discuss with the panelists here who have kindly agreed to be part of the panel. And once again, I would just introduce the panel before individually going to them. So we have with us Dr. Naresh Tyagi, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail. We have Dr. Amit Kumar Thakur, who is the Associate Director and Head CSR, TERI. We have Mr. Saikat Basu, who is the CEO of Consultivo, and Professor Sudipta De, Professor Mechanical Engineering, Jadavpur University, and a renowned expert in the area of energy transition. So if I just begin with Mr. Tyagi. So, you know, the industry which you represent is fashion garments industry, and today we see there is a completely shift in the buyer's attitude or buyer's preference, especially in the West, in the area of the sustainable fashion and the garments. The traction is also there perhaps in some of the developing countries, but it's slowly growing. So if you could highlight some of these top two to three sustainability trends which are affecting your products and businesses, and what are your corporate approach to respond to these trends?
Hi. Thank you very much and giving this opportunity to me in this event. If we see that garment, textile and retail as an industry, we heard in previous panel, climate change is very obvious, we are seeing it. And our industry, textile and garment, is one of the most pollutant industry. We know that how damage has been done in last 5-6 decades in this industry. So 2-3 big mega trend which I see in our industry. you find that industry is on extreme of two sides. One, it is highly glamorous in terms of ramp and fashion, which in the Western world. Other side, that supply chain, which is mostly least developed country, particularly in Asia, is extreme condition of manufacturing. So we need to balance it. And one of the biggest thing is that lot of natural resource is used in that. Water, energy, even that lot of waste is generated. I think one of that biggest mega trend is how we balance resource efficiency to resource optimization. Second thing is that we have seen, particularly consumer side, millennials and Gen Z, they are very conscious and they want that brand to be responsible. They want manufacturing and sourcing to be more ethical. So consumer is keen to know how my product is being created, how it is being sold, and they want complete transparency in that. Hence, it's not supply chain, they want value chain transparency in that. And our industry is one of the laggard in terms of technology. So how that technology can enable traceability and transparency in that. Third thing, I think which is very, very crucial and critical in this time, consumption of garment has gone very high. If you see last 1 decade, it's almost 80% higher consumption. Particularly in Asia, that consumption is 50 to 60% higher. More consumption means more production. And more production in garment and textile industry, exploiting natural resource much more. So I think now people are looking a way to have that business model which is built on that recycling circularity model. Not linear system, but circular system. So I think these are the three big mega trend which I see in the industry. And we are seeing it whether it is Western world or Asia or anywhere in the globe. These are emerging as a top sustainability theme. To respond to on this, I think this is not about one region or one company or organization. It's the collective action plan which we need to come. We being one of the leading fashion retail company in India, every second we sell 12 to 13 garment. We have 30 brand in our portfolio. India is the big market, big consumption. So how we become more responsible brand, how we create sustainability as an ability to sustain in future, not in present scenario. So we started our journey, what we call Re-Earth for our tomorrow. And it started in 2012-13 when even sustainability or ESG was not buzzword. We have 10 mission, energy, carbon, safety, product packaging, water, waste, zero waste to landfill. Like that, we have 10 mission, and we put a well-structured target, what we are supposed to do in each area. And I'm happy to say that in last 1 decade, we have made very, very good progress. If I tell you that one garment or one shirt of 300 gram, it requires 185 gram of the packaging material. To pack one shirt, you require 22 items to pack it. From clip to bag to pin to this and that, 22 items. Today, we have eliminated almost thousands of tonnage of plastic and packaging material. Today it is 7 items. And we say one tag, one garment. And we are the first company, retail company in India to eliminate plastic carry bag in 2016 when there was no government legislation. So I think doing it voluntary and doing it with right purpose and intent is something we feel we have taken the initiative much before it was buzzword. And doing all these things, we become not only top company in sustainability in India, but in Dow Jones Sustainability Index, we are the top company in Asia for our sector. We are globally 8th. Many of our manufacturing unit, we heard our colleague from Bangladesh, green building and green factory. Our own 5 factories green factory. 2 of our warehouse is platinum level. Largest warehouse in India is platinum rated. We are the only company in garment sector worldwide which has that true zero waste. Means all our waste is zero waste to landfill. None of the single gram from our operation goes to landfill. We are working on pre-consumer waste to convert that linear to circular model. It's still a long way to go, but I think we are able to bring sustainability as a fulcrum of what is good for not only for company, but for society and for industry and country in large. Our Prime Minister has already signed the pledge for COP26 to be net zero country. Mission Life has been launched. So how we as an organization, as an industry or as a citizen contribute to it, something which we are trying to do.
Thank you, Dr. Tyagi. I think very encouraging insights you have provided. And Aditya Birla as a group, not only the garment fashion industry, but in many, many areas which are also highly greenhouse gas intensive, has taken quite an aggressive and structured targets to reduce that. And the whole strategic framework which you have just mentioned, which perhaps started in 2012-13 back, is something of an example many of the corporates can follow or should follow. I would rather like to ask you one more question, which is very related to that, before moving to other industries, that especially in the garments or textile, you have what you call the very high scope 3 emissions, which is the emissions happening beyond your production boundary, which are related to your customers and suppliers. And managing the scope 3 emission is not a very easy task. It's a very daunting task and a complex problem to solve. So if you could highlight that, what are the initiatives you are taking to systematically manage the scope 3 emissions of your company?
Thank you for asking this question. Very difficult to answer because we know that how challenging it is to address the scope 3. But before we move to scope 3, I think scope 1 and scope 2 is also important. In last 1 decade, we made very, very good progress in scope 1 and 2. Almost 33% reduction we have done in our energy consumption. We have moved to renewable energy. Even 68% of our energy requirement in factory, warehouse and office come through renewable source. Seeing all these achievement and success, we thought we need to expand it to that scope 3. Very, 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 very challenging task, but we, being that SBTi signatory, we have to show the path to other. We started with a small thing with our supplier. We call it partnership approach. 2013-14, we started with our critical partner to have Green Channel Partnership, GCP. Means we start mapping that, how they are doing on their sustainability and how they are measuring their emission and resource efficiency. We are the founding circle member of a global think tank called Sustainable Apparel Coalition. We pilot Higg Index for our supplier. Almost 40 supplier was taken to adopt FEM model for Higg Index in India and Bangladesh. Seeing that Higg Index progress and getting some data on what we call, that time it was not ESG, but our Green Channel Partnership. We first look into basic hygiene, how it is, and then extending it to that what we call that cascading ESG into our supply chain. We launched something called Supplier Sustainability Index, where scope 1, 2, 3 was part of that data collation, and even water, energy, waste, all that critical mission what we have, we oriented our supplier on that. Scope 3 is still, it is big task. We are early stage of mapping it for our supplier, but SSI has moved, Supplier Sustainability Index has moved to almost 90 suppliers of us, who supply mostly that 60 to 70% of our requirement. And our own 10 garmenting unit is already showing the path to other as a business case or as a best practice. Hopefully, with the 30 supplier in Bangladesh, 10 supplier in Vietnam, and 65 supplier in India, that we will be taking scope 3 into one side is supply chain side, other side is in consumer side, how we encourage consumer for sustainable consumption, how we do that SDG 12, responsible manufacturing and consumption. So we will be not only taking it to supply chain, but even encouraging our consumer for recycling and reuse. So pre-consumer waste and post-consumer waste, less carbon footprint material. These are something which we are taking for our product design and products sourcing and manufacturing. Hopefully that will translate into that what we call is life cycle thinking approach, where we have everything fact-based, database, and it will give that some of the result. We have set target 2025, 2030, where big chunk of it will come from that supply chain.
Thanks a lot for enlightening us. In fact, the reason for me to ask this question and also connect it back to some extent to the previous panel we discussed on the supply chain, which is a very important issue for this whole BIMSTEC region. And I should quote, there is a recent World Bank study which points out that if this region doesn't engage effectively with the multinational corporations, then only the government effort will not be sufficient to meet the net zero goal or the climate resilience goal. Because a small number of large multinational corporations actually account for a substantial volume of global carbon emissions. The 157 large multinational corporations across the world actually contributes to 60% of the global industrial greenhouse gas emissions. And it actually doesn't come from their scope 1 or scope 2 emissions, which are essentially related to the operations, but large part comes from their supply chain. And since this region hosts a large number of such supply chain, it's important some programmatic approaches are defined to systematically transform these suppliers into a more green and climate resilient pathway. Well, so I will possibly go to Dr. Amit Kumar Thakur from TERI, and probably ask him a bit around carbon market. And we are hearing a lot about carbon market. We know the previous regime went down, which is the Clean Development Mechanism or the CDM regime, but now there is a whole lot of new enthusiasm from the carbon buyers which are growing, which is actually pulling as well as pushing a lot of industries to take up the low carbon projects. So if you could enlighten us of some of what's the state and status of carbon market, especially for Indian industries, and how industries can leverage the carbon market to implement some of the, say, more high capital expenditure technologies and the projects.
So first of all, thank you Indian Chambers of Commerce for inviting me to this very prestigious BIMSTEC event. The BIMSTEC is very uniquely placed in terms of we are having common issues, common problems, and still, you know, we are still striving hard to find, you know, solutions. So climate change, in fact, is not only a local issue, not limited to any province or a state. It's a global issue. So boundaries, in fact, there are no boundaries to it. So if something is happening in US, it is going to impact the European countries, it's going to impact India, and thereby I would like to say it's going to impact the entire BIMSTEC countries. So there has to be a collective action. There has to be a unified approach in terms of addressing climate change. So now climate change is not a buzzword anymore. And TERI, in fact, is an organization which is in the 50th year. We are a old organization now with 50 years of existence in India. And we were one of the first to talk about climate change since 1982, when we had the first, you know, conference on climate change. So our areas are into climate change, energy, environment, CSR, and sustainable development. And we have given a pathways also for 100 years, how India would be from 1947 to 2047, and how we can go towards a more sustainable path. So I'll come very quickly to the carbon market and the whole how it is developing, both the voluntary market as well as the compliance market. But before that, we little bit, how things are going forward in climate negotiations and climate justice or carbon finance, and what has led to carbon market, why there is so much of talk, hue and cry for carbon market or going towards towards a low carbon path. India predominantly is a country which has shown path to the entire world. We do believe in the fact that Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, in which we always have believed in the path that with less we can create more, and our history very much advocates that, amplifies that. Even India set up its climate goal in 2008, the National Action Plan on Climate Change, and Honorable Prime Minister of India, PM Modi, has very categorically said that by 2070, the Panch Amrita, 2070 India will become carbon neutral, and 2030, almost 50% of the solutions will be through renewables. So and 2015, in fact, if you see the COP Conference of Parties in the Paris Agreement, it has laid down very categorically that there has to be more inclination towards a low carbon path. So who will do it? In fact, are only the companies would do it, or the governments would do it? So it's a joint responsibility, and each individual has to do it, because now globally we have reached close to 8 billion, and in India we are reaching almost 1.5 billion. So there is a huge stress on natural resources, and that stress in fact is going to increase over a span of time. So and what are the natural resources? Those natural resources are being extracted, mined, or utilized to produce anything that we use on a daily basis. So when there is a stress on natural resources, there would be impacts, and the impacts are very much visible, and that's why the concept of vulnerability comes into the picture. We are highly vulnerable, and everyone, even we say that US, EU, or China, and now India, these three are polluting the most, and 50 less developed countries in fact only contribute 1%. But again, over a span of time, if you see the geographies of each nation, everyone now aspires to be a developed country, or moving from or towards a more developing country. So your developmental path, your energy demand is going to go is rising day by day. And if you see any example, even in the rural context, we do a lot of program projects on CSR, on sustainability. On the local level, in fact, at the villages, we are trying to see that we have an aspiring population, and the energy demand is going up. So if you talk in Indian context, India has laid down the path. India has an NDC in place, and India has set its goal. But again, India needs to have a developmental path, and coal is the key. Coal will remain as we see the growth of coal. We have said that 50% may be met by renewables, and solar is going to play a key role. But again, coal has to be there. Power plants has to be there for some time. In fact, 2050 it will be there. So and the coal and the Ministry of Coal also has enhanced its output. So and that is because for multiple reasons that we need reliable power over a span of time. So this gradual shift towards clean technology, towards low carbon path is now happening strongly. But each one of us has to take that responsibility in terms of going towards a low carbon path. Now there have been several, conferences globally. If you talk about the Stockholm Conference 72 or the Rio Conference 1992 or 2002, in fact, the SDG Conference. Then we have the Paris Agreement through COP, and now we are having, the COP 28, which is going to happen at UAE. So the whole thing came from the Paris Agreement that, we need to make a path which is more resilient towards a low carbon path, and clean energy is going to play a key role. So now I'm coming to the carbon market and how it is developing. There are two types of carbon market, and we are very closely working in this aspect. One is the voluntary, and the second one is the compliance. Voluntary, the Indian market or as such market, in fact, the developing countries, in fact, majorly the country which pollutes more, or the corporations who feel that they need to achieve the net zero. So there is a lot of steadiness or lot of I would say interest now in all the countries, largely the developed one and the big corporations, to become carbon neutral or maybe carbon going beyond that. So therefore they need to identify projects and programs which will help them to reduce their emissions on whatever industry they are into either primary, secondary or tertiary. Majorly the secondary part, the industries. So they need to see that from where they can offset the emissions that they are doing. For example, at my household level, if I emit or I use through various energy demand that I have through television, through fridge, AC. Suppose I am using or I am polluting for example, 1,000 units of electricity, and that electricity is coming from coal. So how do I offset it? So the mechanism is that I put a solar system in my house of maybe 5 kilowatt, or I do lot of natural resource management program that is called nature-based program, which is the plantations or engaging with the forestry department. So these are two mechanisms which are coming up where the big organizations, the Fortune 500 companies who are globally based, and they need to take up projects in developing countries, including India and many other countries. We had an event at TERI, it's called World Sustainable Development Summit, and one of the vice president from African country was there, and he said that they have almost given their forest for carbon market or carbon credit. So because he in fact informed that the fund is not there, so they need to have fund for the development of their country. So one is the voluntary market and second is the compliance market. Voluntary market is that in which the developing countries where you can invest and the country gets some carbon offset, some funds to do developmental work. Compliance market are the developed to develop nation market. If a US want to invest something in Japan, that's a compliance market. If European country want to invest in India or Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, that's a voluntary market. So that's the carbon market is developing. Indian government is coming up with a policy. We're also looking at the policy. Ministry of Power, Bureau of Energy Efficiency are working on it along with Ministry of Environment and Forest. So this is how it is growing, and it is growing. It is going to become big in the coming year. And we also do have a lot of projects on ground on carbon credit program, and that's a very big opportunity, in fact, for the NGOs or with the companies to become carbon neutral and do projects on ground. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it's an important point to highlight that the rules of the carbon market is also now changing. Some way it's also becoming friendly, but also quite fragmented. And we see in certain circumstances the prices are skyrocketing in few cases for carbon price, and that's an encouraging move for many industries. And many new type of projects, he mentioned about nature-based projects which are helpful for offsetting carbon emissions are becoming the potential candidates for leveraging carbon credit. So I will now move to Professor Dey, and on a very important but an interesting topic which is related to skills and skills curricula, the learnings associated with green transition or energy transition. And we all know that as industries, for industries, it's a transition pathway. It's just not one step jump from where they are today to low carbon or net zero. And if we say net zero, it's quite a quantum jump from where most of these industries are today. And that needs the new skill, new form of understanding, which has to be fed back by the technical institutions, the engineering institutions of our country as well as in the region with a more reformed and the revised curricula. And I know Professor Dey is extensively involved in this area for a very long time, and would like to hear from you, sir, a few highlights of how do you see this, the whole skill and the competency issues are becoming more prominent in the discussion of low carbon and zero carbon transition, especially now with the whole new type of technologies like AI or ML coming in the picture. It's adding another layer of complications there. So if you give us an overview on that, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me. And obviously, I'm maybe an odd man out because it's the industry chamber, but I'm from academics. So how you look into the subject actually? Me as a teacher, I look into myself as I'm selling my intangible products to my unwilling customers. Who are my customers? My students. And selling something intangible because this is the knowledge. Interestingly, the education has got different perspectives, out of which one part is training. But value addition is another important part, which my student will be a very important citizen of country. And we feel that the citizen should not be of a country, but a global citizen. From that perspective, I'm coming to the so-called concept of climate change, which is the theme area. Interestingly, I currently, and many of my colleagues also, whatever we teach now, we were not taught at our undergraduate level. Because the entire scenario is changing. And we are in engineering means applied science. Applied science means the science only explores truth of nature, but application science must look into the proper utilization of that for the benefit of mankind. So we have to change, no other option. And another important aspect is we have created disciplines of learning just because of giving some content to the students within a very stipulated short time. Nature doesn't know any discipline. Nature knows only interdisciplinarity. So this is the modern trend of education we have to introduce into the system. Now, interestingly, when I started the course in Jadavpur University Energy Conservation in 2000, the entire course curriculum was developed by me. And that time, to the students, it was something new. Now, it has even become, to some extent, obsolete. I'm telling from the context of the subsequent development of climate change and the sustainability. And in my perception, sustainable development is such a thing which is excellent in concept, but very difficult to know which path will be actually sustainable. So what you have to do on the basis of the defined principle of three pillars, economic, environmental, and social, we have to think of our path, but the actual impact of those paths will be only realized rather when we follow that path for some time. Now coming to the specific point, as Mr. Bandyopadhyay has mentioned, and it's a coincidence because Jadavpur University is currently revising its undergraduate and postgraduate curriculum of engineering faculty, and I have to chair both the committees for that particular purpose. Really, it's a very difficult task because earning after learning is important, but adding values simultaneously to the students in that short period of time is an important aspect, I feel. Teachers are not instructors. They must be facilitators for their future values and learning. From that perspective, what we have thought about, what Mr. Bandyopadhyay has mentioned, we think that the students must have in their context overall values. Unless we can bring the value in from the perspective of sustainability in the education, that may not be properly utilized. Like, we respect elders. Why? It's an injected value to us over a long period. So the sustainable development should be in the education part in such a way so that must be injected as a value proposition, not that only for business purpose. What we are trying to do, and responding to Mr. Bandyopadhyay's issue, yes, AI, ML, these are very much needed, I must admit. So what we are trying to make the course curriculum in the sense, there will be a major part and there will be a minor part. Means interdisciplinarity cannot be brought about by bringing all the subject and knowing nothing. There must be discipline-specific thing. Unless a particular student is very much expert in a disciplined issue, issue related to a particular discipline, he or she cannot fly to interdisciplinary domain. He will become jack of all trades, master of none. So what is our trend, or rather our proposition is this: to address this future sustainability and climate change issues, we will put it as a value-added minor courses where that will be top up on the basic course of discipline. This is the thing I can answer.
Thank you, Professor Dey, for very insightful elaboration on how even Jadavpur University is gearing up. One more area I would like to touch upon, that you mentioned about revising the academic curricula, which is very important and perhaps the most fundamental step towards forming a more interdisciplinary curricula that sustainability demands. But how to transition from curricula to skills? Because for industries, ultimately, that skill would be very important. And skill at various levels, at vocal level, then as we move into a more sophisticated skills. And today, there are a lot of concern that many of the skills will become obsolete because of the rapid advancement of technology. So how to address this whole complicated challenges in the transition pathway of sustainability?
Excellent issue, because here most of the people are from business and industry. What I feel like, when we go abroad, rather in several interactions in collaboration, international collaborations, we really fit very smoothly into the infrastructure or ecosystem where the academics can contribute to the industry and industry can also reciprocate. India is still lagging, because when we come back to India, we find out there is less scope of that particular issue. What I mentioned in my earlier talk, and what I'm just supplementing to Mr. Bandyopadhyay's question, education and training or skill development should be different issues. And unless the industry needs that specific skill, we cannot just put it as a regular part of our education. That can be a separate chapter. And for that separate chapter, the close collaboration and understanding and exchange of ideas between the industry and academics is very much needed. Why don't you just, industry should extend their hands to the academic institution, because industry has funds and industry will get their inputs, manpower resource from the academic institution. So it's a mutual benefit. So why don't you just extend your hands to create those centers of training so that that will be a little bit away, not directly included in the curriculum, but students will automatically be interested with that, because learning after earning will be automatically solved in that particular problem.
Thank you. In fact, just to add to your point, I think for most industries today are really grappling with the issue. Nobody really has an answer, and it's a very big developmental dilemma, especially for region like South Asia or even Africa, because this is the region needs to migrate to a more digital future, and that's the whole aspiration from the top, from the government, because industries need to remain competitive. But we also need to create jobs. Now, how to marry these two more contradictory dimensions of development, I think that's a very big issue, probably needs much more deeper deliberation to solve. But thanks really for your insight on this issue. Now we'll move to Mr. Saikat Basu, who is the CEO Consultivo. And in this panel, the last topic which I would like to discuss, which is also a very, very important topic, which is small and medium scale industries. And we know that in this region, as I mentioned, the suppliers, a lot of these suppliers are actually the SMEs. And this region, South Asia region, is the home for several SMEs. And these SMEs are also contributor to the problems of environment and climate change in a big way. It's not always their fault. I'm not talking that from the negative perspective, but circumstances actually lead them to certain situations. There are challenges for them to access finance, for accessing technology, best practices, to move to a more greener and perhaps a more matured, sophisticated pathway. So perhaps would like to hear from you that, how can we solve this whole, the challenges with the SMEs on the green development? Because they are one of the major fulcrum of the green growth, so to say, for this region.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Bandyopadhyay. Very good afternoon. My name is Shaikat Basu. I represent a consulting company called Consultivo. And by virtue of my profession, particularly in the assurance, auditing and consulting business, I personally have been experienced with more than 1,000 SMEs across the world, including the Southeast Asian countries. If you talk about SME, small and medium enterprise, actually it is divided into three components. It's not small and medium. It's actually micro, small and medium. And these three are absolutely three worlds altogether. Three worlds altogether. Medium industries, they have aspirations and their challenge is growth. Small industries, their challenge is sustenance. But the micro industries, their challenge is survival. So absolutely different objective, absolutely different target, absolutely different agenda. And fortunately or unfortunately, almost all of them are part of the supply chain. Very few of them are directly reaching the consumer. Most of them are reaching the consumer through the bigger industries. So that's the situation. Now, when we talk about climate risk and all other terminologies like resilience, like net zero, all these are actually some foreign language to them. This is my personal experience. Absolutely foreign language to them. Maybe few literate people, educated people, they know the words, but they cannot, a doctorate owner of an organization, smaller organization, he or she knows the terminologies, but they cannot relate it to their industry. They can always relate it, well, this is for the bigger industries, not for me. This not for me is the biggest challenge in the SME sector. Not for me. Yes, this is a global problem. I face it every day, but it's not for me. It's for the government. It's for the bigger companies. So possibly the biggest barrier is the mental setup. That is the biggest barrier, and it has got logics. It is not illogical. I am not saying this is illogical. This is absolutely logical, but it's the biggest barrier. Now we talk about the barriers like access to technology, access to the fund. Yes, these are realities, but there are few things which we can do, means as SME, an organization can do by themselves, like change of mindset. So that may create the absolute difference if we can change our mindset. Involvement of people. Very few people talk about involvement of people in a small and medium segment. They think that this is a job of one person responsible in the organization, but that's impossible. One person cannot do these things, because the entire concept of climate risk to an industry has to be integrated in its every activity. It cannot be a separate activity. It has to be integrated in its own activity. Few of the points I want to mention here as the strategy which people can adopt is obviously the energy efficiency. This is something they are quite aware about, because energy efficiency directly give them benefit. Directly give them benefit. So this is something which is prevailing in SME. It's not absolutely new terminology. Renewable energy adoption, very difficult. Except from few water heaters, you won't find anything. And there are a lot of, and they're not aware about the schemes, they are not aware about the possibilities, but there are ample opportunity here. Waste reduction, yes, it is more regulatory driven. If regulation talks about something, they do that. Transportation efficiency, again, out of their control. It has to be more centralized because transportation, what we are talking about, green hydrogen or electric transportation, it is not their cup of tea. Possibly it has to come from some consolidated effort. Monitoring, reporting and disclosure, again something very new to them. In fact, the challenge is, why should I disclose? That's the challenge. But now disclosure has got its own place in the ESG regime, and people are demanding disclosure, including the God means investors. So investors are demanding disclosure, so it has to come down with them. And supply chain, we also forget many times that even the smallest company has got its supply chain. But unfortunately, medium, small and micro segment, they do not have any control on their supply chain. The bigger companies are having better control on their supply chain. Though from Dr. Tyagi's statement, we can see that supply chain is an area where a lot of things can be done. But believe me, the small and medium segment, their supply chain, they do not have any control because they do not have that muscle power. They do not buy much. They buy in smaller quantity. So they cannot dictate their supply chain. So that's another area where possibly more structured effort has to come from the bigger companies. But bigger companies can offer structured effort, but people has to adopt it. So I again close my remarks with one single point: change of mindset from the SME segment that will create a real difference in the whole market.
Great, thank you. And do you see any role of the government here, essentially?
Yeah, government role is always there, but problem is we should not blame government for everything. We should stand in front of the mirror and see what I am doing. Yes, government's role are many. In fact, as I said, like transportation, like policies, like compliance requirement, like even in disclosure. European Union is talking about, India is talking about disclosure, and European Union now talking about one single point of availing disclosures. So there are changes, and in these South Asian countries, the changes will come maybe in next 1-2 years. So government role is very much there, but my request to all SMEs or the bigger segment to look at themselves and think about what we can do. Stand in front of the mirror and see what we can contribute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Basu, for a very detailed view. And in fact, that's what I was actually expecting from this panel, bottom-up view of the practitioners and experts who are working more closely on the ground. And as you mentioned that SMEs, there are many different layers among the SMEs, and this whole mindset issue is definitely a roadblock. And that's where the whole point which I was trying to come, that there is need a closer engagement within the large companies, the multinational brands, as well as the SMEs. Because of course the SMEs cannot influence the supply chain, but the bigger companies can. And the bigger companies can in fact do that in a number of different ways. I mean, it's just not providing the stick, but also creating the carrots. And that's what, in fact, Dr. Tyagi also mentioned few examples, creating the supplier codes or the certain matrices based on which you select the suppliers who are more sustainable. So, and especially for this whole region, this large company engagement is extremely important. So essentially 3 different pillars. One, the SMEs, then another pillar are the large companies or the multinational organizations who are in fact procuring from them. And the third pillar, which is government and say the international organizations who are also working very closely with them, building their capacity, providing the trainings, providing certain easily accessible tools which they can implement on the ground. And again, coming back to the point of nudging, that how you can essentially nudge these SMEs and the industries towards a more sustainable and the climate-friendly behavior. So we are almost at the end of the panel, and I think we have pretty much closed on time. So before closing, thank you each of the panelists once again for enlightening us very ground level view, the practical views of what is working and what is not working. And that's the essence, that's the more focused discussion, that's what we were all expecting from today's panel. Thanks a lot. And once again, thank you Indian Chamber of Commerce for organizing such very interesting panel discussion and the overall session on climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Bandyopadhyay. It was indeed quite an interesting discussion. May I request Mr. Saikat Basu to please give a few words as a final vote of thanks.
Very good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to deliver the closing remarks and formal vote of thanks at the end of this very engaging session. Yes, I should say it is engaging because I could see many of the people were quite taking their notes. They were keen, so we can call it an engaging session. I take this as an opportunity to convey my sincere gratitude to Mr. Ajay Bandyopadhyay, Asia Lead Climate Change Advisory, Manufacturing, Agribusiness and Services, IFC World Bank Group, for his gracious presence amid his busy schedule and enlightening us with his valuable deliverables. I would also like to sincerely thank His Excellency Mr. Andalib Elias, Deputy High Commissioner, Bangladesh Deputy High Commission, Kolkata, Ms. Melinda Pavek, Consul General, US Consulate General, Kolkata, Mr. Tandy Wangchuk, President, Bhutan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Shoaib Chaudhary, Vice President, IBCCI and former advisor, Commonwealth Business Council, London, Dr. Naresh Tyagi, Chief Sustainability Officer, Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, Mr. Sudipto Mukherjee, Chief Advisor, Generation, CSC Limited, Dr. Amit Kumar Thakur, Associate Director and Head CSR, the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, and Professor Sudipto De, the Professor Mechanical Engineering, Jadavpur University, for being present here, sharing their valuable insights. I would also like to express my appreciation to our friends in the media for widely covering today's session. Also, on behalf of the ICC, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners and sponsors for their constant support and assistance. I think the session has successfully addressed the key issues regarding the challenges experienced due to climate change and the need for cooperation among BIMSTEC nations in fulfilling their climate action commitments. I'd like to end my speech by highlighting a few important points. The overview of the socioeconomic status of BIMSTEC nations reveals that all the BIMSTEC nations have experienced structural transformation in their economics. They rely on industrialization for their steady growth and development. However, steady growth does not readily guarantee sustainable development, quite naturally, if the growth is not accompanied by the internalization of GHG emissions and adaptive capacity to deal with the impact of climate change. We have observed that agriculture is one of the major contributors to the climate change. It currently generates 19 to 29% of greenhouse gas emissions. In this regard, the BIMSTEC nations can adopt a climate-smart agricultural approach to address the interlinked challenges of food security and transform agri-food system towards green and climate-resilient practices. Though renewable energy is being scaled up around the world to replace fossil fuels, storage has been one of the major challenges, making the target of green energy supply difficult to meet. Hence, nuclear power projects have an opportunity to widen the energy sector and accelerate the net zero race. For example, recently India has considered investing in a nuclear project in collaboration between NTPC and National Nuclear Power Corporation of India to generate carbon-free electricity. Similar approaches can be adopted by other member nations to address the issue. Projects aimed at landfill gas collection can be launched at an alternative to the fossil fuels used for generating electricity. So, and lastly, promotion of green trade among BIMSTEC countries can initiate environmental cooperation and multinational climate agreements to reduce the issue of climate change. And thank you so much for your patient hearing, your presence, and over to ICC.
Thank you, sir. So we will now end the session, and I would request Mr. Bandopadhyay to please hand over mementos to our speakers. Firstly to Mr. Shoikat Basu. Thank you, Mr. Basu. Dr. Amit Thakur. Dr. Naresh Tyagi. And Professor Shudipto De. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the session. Have a nice day and do join us for lunch.